Thank you for joining us again. We have something special for you today. Friend of the channel and former federal law enforcement officer Dave Jenkins visited, along with his son Dylan and his dog Charlie, the town of Delphi last month. We've got his report and video they took. If you've followed any of our other episodes on the Delphi murders, you know that my only goal has been to gain a deeper understanding. I actually didn't start researching the case until this past September, so about 5.5 years after the horrible slayings. And one of the things I quickly found was that for some reason, this case had sprouted a lot of wild theories. Look, if you're interested in listening to those kind of channels, I don't criticize you. We live in a crazy world and you never know what's really going on sometimes. You aren't harming anyone by listening to something. For me, with the goal of understanding, I've been willing to theorize. That to me is the scientific method. The apple falls and hits Newton in the head, and he begins theorizing on gravity. He gets some things wrong, some things right, but theorizing is part of the process. Of course, you have a better chance of gaining understanding if your theories are grounded to reality in some kind of reasonable way. In Delphi, an early question I had was how someone could control 2 girls while marching them a half-mile in a public area. Did he have accomplices? Did he bind their hands in some way? The girls were stabbed. Did he also have a gun that was used to control them? Did he lie to them in order to keep them calm? For instance, by saying something like, "You're under arrest. I'm taking you to jail where your parents can pick you up." In this small town, did the girls recognize him? That was my starting point, those questions. And in hindsight, a lot of those questions, though reasonable, did not bear fruit. Big questions in this case still remain. Me and Dave bounce ideas back and forth on the case. He's followed it since the beginning, and he still has strong law enforcement instincts about things. I myself spent my life in the bar industry, first as a bartender, then as a bar owner, so I probably don't have any useful instincts that apply here other than being able to spot when you've had enough. And you're almost there now, so you're shut off. Okay, one more, but give me your car keys. Anyway, Dave leans toward the Kleins still having some involvement. In his view, it would be just too coincidental to have all this catfishing of Libby going on and for it not to be connected. I think especially to a veteran investigator, coincidences are really hard to swallow. When Dave was preparing to travel with Dylan to Delphi, there were questions I hoped he might learn something about. For instance, how far was the walk from where Richard Allen parked to the trail entrance? Did it feel secluded or open? How much traffic was there? Because I'd wondered if Richard Allen's original plan had been to abduct one of the other 3 underage girls who are now witnesses in the case. They had passed Allen at the trail's entrance. So could a girl be abducted at gunpoint at the trail entrance and taken to his car? It seemed to me that most of these predatory cases involving children have an abductor who takes the victim into his vehicle. Then he can take them where he wants and get rid of the body away from the abduction site. For this reason, often the bodies are never found. So was it plausible for Allen to march a girl at gunpoint to his car from the trail entrance? What were the chances of other cars going by? Another big question was how Allen could even hypothetically claim that he didn't see Abby and Libby. He arrived at the bridge only about 10 minutes before the girls. He was at the bridge when the young adult, Sue, arrived and saw him standing on it. Only 5 minutes after that, Abby and Libby reached the bridge. He claimed he never saw them. How can his lawyers possibly explain this? I guess they might say he left the trail to walk down to the creek, but Allen didn't claim doing this in his original interview. Another question we had was whether Allen expected Abby and Libby to cross the bridge. Did most kids cross it when they visited the trail? How many times had he been out there to observe what went on around that bridge? It's a long bridge that continues for some distance on the other side of the creek. So at the other end of the bridge, it's very secluded. Private property, actually. The trail ends. Much less likely to be seen if your plan is to abduct someone there, unlike the front side of the bridge, which is where the trail actually ends and is frequented by hikers. Another question we had was, why did they cross the freezing creek in February? It's very shallow, but still, no one generally wants to wade through 40-degree water in the middle of the winter. Did the girls make a run for it, forcing Alan to chase them through the water? Or did Alan lead them purposely through the creek for some reason? And we were curious about Alan's walk back to his car, where a witness saw him uncovered in mud and blood. Was he walking in the open the whole way? Was there any way to avoid walking in the open? Did he go by any homes? Did the Harvest Store camera pick him up? So Dave and his faithful dog Charlie and his son Dylan, who will soon be going to medical school, congrats and good luck, packed the car and went to Delphi, hoping for insight. I've been unable to convince him to go on camera yet because of his former career doing undercover work, but he was kind enough to script out this episode for us. So this is it. Here we go. If you've been following the investigation into the 2017 murders of Abby and Libby, you'll probably understand my desire to see and walk the area. Hearing it described by YouTube sleuths did little to satisfy my curiosity, so in February of this year, almost exactly 6 years after the murders, I drove from Ohio to Indiana, determined to see for myself. I was fortunate to have my son Dylan with me. Like myself, Dylan is a military veteran with an understanding and appreciation of terrain and how it shapes the way we travel over land. He's intelligent, logical, and almost irritatingly quick to understand. For security, we brought Charlie, who, as you can see right here, is a beast no one would mess with. Most of you already are familiar with the heartbreaking murders of Libby and Abby. As a father, I was bothered by this case and frustrated at the slow pace of the investigation. A breakthrough finally emerged at the end of this past October when Richard Allen was arrested. He'd been recently interviewed by the state police. Allen had also been interviewed shortly after the murders, an interview he initiated himself. After police talked to him in October, a search warrant was obtained and executed at Allen's home. He was detained and subsequently charged with the murders. On the face of it, this seems absurd. Richard Allen had lived in Delphi for many years. He worked in the only CVS drugstore in Delphi, a town of less than 3,000. He was a homeowner, married, friendly enough, and not exactly hiding out in the nearly 6 years since the murders. He liked the outdoors, hiking, and playing pool at the local watering hole. When Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother, brought Libby's funeral photos to the CVS for processing, Allen delivered them himself at no charge. Richard Allen was just a regular guy. By chance, Dylan and I got a room in Peru about 40 minutes from Delphi, because Delphi isn't exactly blessed with accommodations. As it happens, Peru is where Keegan Kline lived, the young man who was catfishing underage girls, including Libby, under the guise of Anthony Shots. Every person we encountered in both Peru and Delphi was friendly. When assistance or advice were needed, they gave without a grumble. Nice people. Not sure if that's a regular Indiana thing, probably, but it was notable enough that Dylan and I talked about it. The hotel wasn't 5-star, but it was clean, inexpensive, staffed by friendly Indiana folk, and even had a decent complimentary breakfast. So shout out to the Best Western Circus City Inn. I did eat some pretty scary Chinese food in Peru, so if you're in the area and craving Chinese, proceed with caution. Next, we drove to Delphi. I'd looked at maps and videos of the area, but the geography of this case troubled me. It's hard to imagine something so terrible happening in such a sleepy little town like Delphi. Harder still to understand why it wasn't quickly solved. So I needed a first-hand look. I couldn't have asked for a better day. Weather-wise, it almost perfectly mirrored that fateful day when the girls on school break went to visit the trail. The high was 45 on the day of the murders. Beautiful weather for February in the Midwest, and a perfect day for best friends to enjoy a rare Monday holiday. 6 years later, when we arrived, it was 39 degrees and pleasant. The water temperature of Deer Creek was also 39. For some reason, the girls and their killer crossed through that frigid water on the way to the murder scene. Why? It was one of the things I hope to understand. It's worth remembering that everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. However, the timeline evidence outlined in the arrest affidavit makes a powerful case against Richard Allen. That timeline was discussed on this channel in a previous video, and it just about puts the nails in Richard Allen's criminal coffin. Arriving in Delphi, we didn't first go to the murder scene. We went to the home of Richard Allen so we could travel the path he took that day. I felt sorry for Allen's neighbors who were probably suffering more traffic since the arrest. We didn't linger. GPS suggested the fastest route to the Monon High Bridge Trail, but we knew the camera at the Hughs Harvest Store had picked up his car, so we went that way, Allen's likely route. This route was more scenic, the back way, west on CR 300 North. Passing the Hughs Harvest Store on the right and the Mears Farm entrance to the Monon Bridge Trail on the left, this time of year you can clearly see the trail to the left through the trees. It comes quite close to the road at points. Anyone walking the trail would be very visible. We passed a couple of houses on the left, fairly close to the road, rounded a curve, and found the site of the old CPS building on the left. Just a vacant lot now. This is where Richard Allen parked. We passed only a few cars, and we were surprised at how open everything was. With the leaves bare and the undergrowth gone, everything was visible. The road, the trail, the creek, surrounding structures. On a nice day when kids had no school, there would have been hikers on the trails and vehicles on the road. The drivers of every vehicle we passed offered a friendly wave, a country thing, friendly Indiana. Did any driver wave to Allen as he drove to the old CPS building? Did he wave back? Or was he preoccupied? Was this the first time he'd come to the trail with murder on his mind? The trail area is beautiful, a wooded valley with Deer Creek idling through, surrounded by lush hills, as scenic a place as you could want to visit. My first significant observation as someone who has followed this case from day one was the compactness. You hear the descriptions and you see the maps and you feel the area is spread across a significant landscape, but that's not the case. In winter, the location around the trail feels small and unconcealed. We parked in the gravel parking area just off the Hoosier Heartland Highway. My old Chevy pickup fit right in with the local traffic, but there were no other vehicles parked there the day we were there. Almost directly across the highway is the old CPS building site where Richard Allen had parked his car 6 years before. He backed in, hiding his license plate, but in so doing, drew unwanted attention. The walk from where he parked to the start of the trail is about 2 minutes. Several makeshift shrines to Abby and Libby dot the path right before it meets the trail entrance. The conglomeration of these little personal dedications create a touching memorial. Freedom Bridge crosses the busy Hoosier Highway and leads into the circle right before the trail entrance. Charlie tugged at the leash, eager to lead us up the trail. Note that CR 300 runs parallel, only about 60 yards to the left. In summer, the vegetation would shield the road from anyone on the trail, but in February, it's close and visible. The trail itself is asphalt now, though it was gravel at the time of the murders. It's about 8 feet wide. If you pass someone on the trail, it's a close pass, close enough to smell someone, close enough to sense fear or danger. You'd probably remember someone oddly overdressed for a sunny day of 45 degrees. On the day we were there, 6 degrees cooler than the day of the murders, I was wearing jeans and a long-sleeve shirt and quite comfortable. As we hiked, I began sweating. If I recall correctly, Libby was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, Abby jeans and a windbreaker. Why was Bridge Guy so warmly dressed? What was he hiding? These seem like indications of premeditation, but did he have specific targets in mind or targets of opportunity? That's what we hope to get some insight on. Walking the trail, we continued to note how close the road to the left was in spots. A couple of houses are also visible on the left. The road breaks away around the Mears farm entrance. This is where Abby and Libby were dropped off and where they entered the trail. The entrance consists of a gravel drive, and at the time of the killings, people could park there. There also is a moving tribute to the girls. Knowing this was where they started their last journey, we felt deeply touched. The sadness of it all had me questioning my decision to come here. Libby's sister Kelsey dropped them off just up that drive and never saw her kid sister again. As the girls walked, they would have been maybe talking about school or about the rich beauty of the view they were seeing over the creek below, or about Anthony Schatz. Thinking of that reaffirmed my purpose. I wanted to understand this tragedy. Just to the right of this juncture is the bench mentioned in the affidavit. The seat faces away from the trail, so it can look out over the breathtaking valley surrounding Deer Creek. 5 or 6 minutes from the Mears Farm juncture, you're at the bridge. It's much improved over what it was in 2017. There's a repaired section now in the front, open to the public, that's covered by decking and has a solid railing. It offers a great view of the Deer Creek Valley. The end of the bridge is visible, but only just. The aged wood of the decaying railroad ties blending in the distance with the gray trees of February. We didn't cross. The bridge beyond the new observation area is unsafe, and for us, there was a feeling of trespassing. So we just took it all in, studying the creek and its banks. It's a peaceful place, and we understood its appeal to locals and to kids looking for something to do on a day off from school. Charlie gave it all a smell, applying senses we humans didn't have. We were there for maybe 15 minutes when we saw a couple coming toward us from the trail. Locals just enjoying the day. They liked watching for eagles from the bridge. As with everyone else we've met, they were super friendly. It was a Saturday, midday, beautiful weather. They were the first people we'd seen since parking the truck. Does that give us any idea how busy the area was on the day of the murders? I wouldn't have thought this was a great spot for an attack. Not if you expected to get away. But if everything fell into place like the pins in the cylinder of a lock on a certain day at a certain time, I could see how a desperate predator might take the chance. And as we know, a predator did. Stepping off the bridge, we stopped to investigate the surrounding land. Towards one side was a sharp drop-off to Deer Creek. To the other side is woods that this time of year is devoid of undergrowth. So you could see all the way through these woods, hundreds of yards, to the harvested field beyond. That field runs to Mears Farm, narrowing as it reaches it. On one border of the field is CR 300. Also abutting it is a cemetery. One surprising conclusion I'd reached as I studied the trail was that I couldn't imagine any place along it viable for an abduction, except possibly at the very beginning of the trail, right at the entrance near Freedom Bridge. In most spots, the embankment down to the creek was just too steep, and the sliver of woods along the trail too narrow and too exposed to houses or to the road or to other hikers on the trail. I couldn't conceive of a killer abducting someone on this side of the bridge. That surprised me, because it meant that Libby and Abby would probably still be alive if they hadn't crossed the bridge. That bridge was a perfect trap for a predator, which Alan no doubt knew beforehand. Whether he had targeted these girls in particular or was just waiting for anyone suitable, it was the perfect trap as long as the victims crossed the bridge. Kevin and I had discussed the possibility that Alan had intended to take one of the 3 girls he encountered at the beginning of the trail. I had been skeptical before coming here, but my son saw the potential right away. If you had a gun and didn't see anyone approaching from Freedom Bridge or from further down the trail, you could do it. If you kept it casual looking, hooking an arm under through theirs, you could walk them right to a car parked at the CPS building and be gone in 2 minutes. And if you were working with an accomplice, then you could pull up on CR 300 and the whole thing would be done in 25 seconds. Poof. My son had a couple of other intriguing thoughts about this scenario. One struck me as particularly interesting. He asked me if I thought, with the video obtained from the Who's Your Harvest store, how many people were visible inside a vehicle. We have no way of knowing. He wondered if Alan had an accomplice inside his car. Could an accomplice have stayed with the car, ready to respond when called? Neither one of us particularly think that's what happened, but it was an interesting thought and opened my mind to scenarios I hadn't previously considered. The affidavit timeline fairly well establishes that Alan waited in or near his car for several minutes before heading onto the trail. Why? Dylan thought that perhaps he was waiting for a call, or watching for a specific car to pass, or watching to see who crossed from Freedom Bridge. Or maybe, as someone on the channel suggested, he was just drinking his inhibitions into submission. We don't know, but it seemed clear after visiting the trail that there were only two places that felt like logical locations for an abduction: the beginning of the trail or beyond the trail's end at the other side of the Monon High Bridge. Me and Dylan discussed this as we lingered by the new observation area on the Monon High Bridge. The scenic view is hypnotic, a local treasure. 60 feet below, Deer Creek meanders past. About a half mile up the creek, two little girls would experience the culmination of a nightmare. Richard Allen had claimed in his interview days after the murders that he had stood on this spot watching for fish. This would have been 5 to 10 minutes before the girls arrived. He was supposedly doing this when the adult young woman, Sue, reached the bridge. She had intended to go out onto the bridge, but found Allen creepy and turned back. A few minutes later, she passed Abby and Libby. I'd always thought the idea of watching for fish from up here was absurd, but I was wrong. The water was so clear on the day that we were there that I could indeed have watched larger fish in the water below. I didn't see any. Fish in the cold water aren't very active this time of year, but if larger fish were there, yes, I could probably have watched them. But of course, it's very unlikely to see fish in that water in February. Again, I considered whether an abduction could take place on this side of the bridge. I didn't think it likely, but not impossible. In February, you could lead them through the woods in the direction of the cemetery, in the direction of where they were ultimately killed, as a matter of fact. And there would have been no need to wade through the frigid waters of the creek. However, the whole abduction and subsequent marching of the victims through the woods would have been very exposed to anyone on the trail, or anyone driving along the cemetery. I found myself very skeptical that a killer would attempt an abduction on this side of the bridge. That insight was something I wouldn't have had before coming here. So here's how I think it went down. The girls, having started from the Mears farm, passed the hiker Sue. Sue had just seen Alan on the first platform on the bridge. In my opinion, Sue is possibly one very lucky young woman. Had she attempted to cross the bridge, if Alan was not targeting Libby specifically, then she might have ended up the victim. Where did Alan go after Sue turned back? Where did Abby and Libby pass him? Did he pass the girls, then turn around and follow them? Had Alan done this other times before on the trail, waiting for the right circumstances, waiting for the pins of the lock to fall into place and unlock the door for the monster within? Well, the girls did cross the bridge. Libby took a photo of Abby on it. Bridge guy, presumably Richard Allen, crossed behind them, effectively blocking their retreat. He approached them on the far side. He could barely be seen by anyone on the front side because the bridge is 600 feet long. When he showed them a gun and ordered them down the hill, even had someone been on the far end of the bridge on the front end, they wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. Libby's courage in surreptitiously recording Bridge Guy as he charged down the bridge toward them is a big part of the reason this case wedged itself into the public mind. Were it not for her absolute balls, the case might be all but forgotten. In each of our lives, we come to crossroads at various points, moments that reveal to us and to the world who we are. Libby faced such a moment early in her young life, and that moment showed her to be a hero. So I believe that if the girls hadn't crossed that bridge, they would still be alive. Standing here at the front of that bridge, taking in the beauty of the scene, the magic life has to offer, it's heart-rending to think how close those girls might have come to turning around, walking back down the trail, and getting picked up by Libby's dad at the Mears farm. They'd be in college now. I looked at my son, who served his country in the Army and was soon to go to medical school. How quickly life can turn on a dime. But I also remembered it was no act of nature that killed those girls. After marching the girls down the hill, Alan took them east, perhaps along the private road in the direction of the creek, which bends toward the road there. He took them into the woods. I believe at some point the girls made a run for it, probably into the creek. Alan managed to catch them, perhaps in the water. Did he have an accomplice at this point? That might explain how he controlled two young, athletic girls. I don't think Alan ever planned to return across the bridge and along the trail after killing the girls. Too risky, as he was covered in blood. But walking for up to 20 minutes along a road like he didn't seem like good sense either. So to me, something went wrong with Alan's original plan. I considered the private road behind the bridge that the three of them would have reached after coming down the hill. A perfect place for an accomplice with a car to meet them. And this would eliminate the need to wade across the frigid creek, as the accomplice could just drop him off at his car. Maybe that was the plan, but the accomplice didn't show. Another possibility was that the original plan actually was to cross the creek and lead the girls to the backside of the cemetery, where an accomplice waited with a vehicle. It's a perfect secluded place to load the girls and then take them off onto the CR300. But I think maybe the girls made a break for freedom, and Alan was forced to kill them instead, aborting the whole plan. So his accomplice left, forcing him to walk back to his car on foot, exposed to anyone on the road. This is why he was seen by a witness who described him as bloody and muddy. When Dylan and I drove CR300, we realized that there were few places for Alan to hide on most of this walk. So if his original plan was to walk back this way, covered in blood, it wasn't a good one. This contributed to the likelihood that something had gone wrong with the plan, perhaps from the girls running, perhaps from an accomplice not showing. So as me and my son, and of course old Charlie, returned up the trail, I ran the possibilities just as I've described them here. I still didn't have convincing answers. Did Alan target Libby, or were his victims random? Did he have an accomplice? If he acted alone and his victims were random, what was his original abduction plan? I still lean toward this being targeted. I believe Alan targeted Libby, knew she was going to be at the trail. Let me go into my reasons why. State Police Superintendent Doug Carter describes the Delphi case as the most complex he has seen in 30 years of law enforcement. That's quite a statement from a man with that many years of experience. He describes the case as having many tentacles. Bridge guy, acting alone, killing two innocent young girls, is a sad case, but it's not complex. Also, the prosecution, when arguing cause to keep Alan's arrest affidavit sealed, cited his belief that other actors were involved in the crime. This is not something a prosecutor states to a judge unless he has solid reason to believe the truth of those words. After killing the girls, Alan emerged on the backside of the cemetery, probably followed the tree line along the harvested field so he could avoid the road, until the geography forced him out onto the road at the Mears Farm entrance. He had two options at that point: get back on the trail or stay on the road. Well, we know he walked the road, not just from the driver who saw him, but also because there were people on the trail at that time and none of them saw him. Certainly, someone muddy and bloody on the trail would have been remembered. So he stayed on the road. I'm a little surprised we haven't heard he was caught walking by the cameras at the Hoosier Harvest store. They did catch his car. My suspicion is that he was, but that the range of the camera was too far to provide a useful image. Many people have expressed doubt that a passing motorist could provide any useful description of a pedestrian on the road. I held similar doubts before walking that road, but I was wrong. The road is narrow, particularly from the point where the tree line meets the Mears Farm entrance. It kind of pinches things down to a choke point. Alan was hustling to his car, wanted to be as invisible from the trail as he could be, so he walked on the north side of the road. Traffic doesn't fly down this country road. It's easygoing, slow-moving cars and trucks. A driver coming from the direction of the CPS building would get a pretty solid look at a guy hustling towards him down the side of the road who was covered in mud and blood. Last thoughts. If this was a planned attack, it was ill-planned or ill-executed. One, he needed the girls to cross the bridge all the way across because it was too risky to take someone on the front side, too high a chance of running into another hiker. Hikers seem to come every few minutes on a nice day, and even if no one saw him take the girls into the woods because the trees were bare, they'd be visible from anyone on the trail as they trudged through the woods for about 15 minutes. One of the girls could easily look back, see the hiker, and scream for help. When you visit the trail in person and see how exposed everything is on the trail itself, it just seems way too risky to abduct someone on the trail and drag them through the bare woods. What if the girls went only part way onto the bridge, stopping over the river? An abduction here would be more doable, but controlling 2 teens on a broken bridge with no rails seems risky. His best option was for the girls to cross all the way. Remember, the bridge extends for about 400 feet beyond the river, and there's no trail at the end of the bridge. It's a dead end. Maybe he'd watched enough kids on other occasions to know most kids went the distance, kind of like a dare. They went all the way to the end. So he reasonably counted on the likelihood he could find kids that would cross. Okay, so the trap was logical, perfect even. Many or most kids would have crossed it all the way, and the bridge was so long you could barely be seen from the front of it if you were on the far end of it. So he hurried to get across just moments before the girls. He knows they'll probably wait for him to pass before starting back. They do wait. He then leads them down the hill. But now he has to, at some point, wade across a frigid creek in February. Whether he kills the girls first, then crosses the water, or leads them across, he still has to cross it to get back to his car. Is that a sensible plan? As it happened, he took the girls across, or chased them when they ran across, then killed them, and spent perhaps an hour with their bodies. But now he still has a long march back to his car, one which will take him down a road for about 15 or 20 minutes, covered in mud and blood. It's not a busy road, but there are homes there and the harvest store. Every few minutes, a car does pass. So being on that road, looking like he did, was not a good plan, if it was the original plan. So let's back up to where Alan led the girls down the hill. At the bottom of that hill is a road, a dead-end road that leads a couple of hundred yards away to a home. So only the homeowner would be using that road there. But there was nothing to stop someone else from having access to it. Someone meeting Richard Allen in a car. Someone who, for some reason, didn't show, forcing Allen to cross the 39-degree waters of the creek. The essential problem with this case, as both Kevin and I have talked about, is that it would be an enormous coincidence if Libby was being targeted by a predatory catfisher in Keegan Klein, yet was killed by another predator and there is absolutely no connection. I just have a hard time buying into such a coincidence until all the evidence is in. And it seems to me the prosecutor also has a hard time buying it. If this is all a coincidence, God, think about how awful poor Libby's luck was, being stalked by 2 predators. But the trip to Delphi didn't provide me with clear answers. I came away believing that if Abby and Libby had not crossed the bridge, they'd still be alive. Yet the existence of a dead-end road at the far end of the bridge, the crossing of a frigid creek, and the long march Alan had to make back to his car still had me worried that there was much more to the story here, that there are still charges related to these murders to come. I do think there's a good chance the truth will come out, and will come straight from Alan himself. From just the evidence listed in the affidavit, Alan is in trouble. And if police can match DNA, or if they found any blood evidence in his car, or any trophies in his home, he has no chance. And I suspect they found something. So Alan, with no chance of winning his freedom, will probably plead out, and he'll tell us what happened. A deal might help him avoid the death penalty. But also, history suggests these guys, once they're caught and cornered, they actually want to talk. During their trial, they have a huge spotlight on them. Shocking people is something they get off on. It's empowering. So I think Alan will talk. And if he has accomplices, he'll give them up. As we left Delphi, my son wore a grave look. His hand rubbed Charlie's head as though they were reassuring each other. This was a good place where something truly evil had happened. He had a thought. Dylan was in the military and soon will enter medical school, and he didn't know much about this case before coming with me. He doesn't follow true crime. But it struck him how bold this crime was, how brazen. Broad daylight, sunny and clear. Witnesses had just seen him on the trail and on the bridge. He worked at CVS, a public position in this tiny little town. Anyone might have ID'd him. Yet, in seemingly his first significant crime, he abducted and murdered 2 girls. Was it really his first? I suspect he's done something similar in the past. His record is clean only because he wasn't caught. And this is something that justifies our interest in the case. 6 years it went unsolved. Tremendous public interest is what kept pressure on the police. Perhaps because of that, Alan will never kill a child again. And if there were accomplices, we need to make sure they can't either. Okay, I want to thank Dave for all his work, Dylan for all his insights, and Charlie for keeping them out of trouble. Please click subscribe to support us. Coming up in the next episode, why I no longer think the girls made a run for it, and how I think police could have solved this crime in weeks.
So this would be the beginning area where he would be backed up against the CPS building, roughly. It has been torn down, as you can see, and it is fairly overgrown.
So, this is North County 300. This would have been the way he'd have been returning to his car parked at the CPS building from the direction we're driving. But this is how exposed he'd have been for a good number of minutes of that walk when he was theoretically muddy and bloody. He'd have been visible all along here. Coming ahead up here on the left, so we're passing residential. Coming up here on the left is that Hughs Harvest store and storage facility that has the cameras.
Right there.
And if he was walking along the road right here, which he just about had to be because you're looking at the trail right down there below, he'd have been very, very visible. So I don't know what he did right here unless he ducked back down over that little berm.
And outside of this little berm, you are completely exposed.
Yep.
Right here. As you can see, it opens back up again.
You're seeing the trail over there through the woods, the Monon High Trail. It's only about 50 yards from the road here.
And here's where the girls were dropped off.
That's where the girls were dropped off. And this is the tree line he probably followed across that farm field. He probably stayed in those trees all the way from the cemetery, which is just up ahead. And if we have it figured out right, he probably followed a big draw up from the river that brings him out almost to the cemetery, and then he probably followed this tree line out the rest of the way until it forced him out by the road. And here's the cemetery. I'm going to turn around right here, and we'll do it the other direction like he'd been walking out. We're all the way at the back of the cemetery, and just past the back of the cemetery, this land drops off into a draw that runs up from the river. A draw is like a ravine, and that would have been an easy and fast route up from the river, and it would have brought him out to about just across from where we're sitting, and that's where he could hit that tree line and follow it along the field, and that would take him about halfway back to his car. But beyond that halfway trip, he's going to be pretty exposed out here along County Road 300. again, he probably came up that draw in the woods behind us from the river, which is not far at all. Followed that tree line over there across the field. Imagine he followed that tree line, which gradually takes him closer and closer out here to 300. And up here you can see the Mears farm. The girls got dropped off right across from that. There's a gate. That's where they were let out. And from that gate to the trail is only about 50 yards. It's also the location of that first bench that the girls in the affidavit talk about. So this tree line that Richard Allen would have followed would have brought him out to about here where the girls were let out. Beyond that, you can see the bench down there at the end of that drive, that gravel drive. This is where the girls were let out. And Richard would have been hoofing it along this road.
You can see here how visible the whole trail is, right here from the side of the road.
Oh yeah. Yep, and they're close together at this point. And Richard would have been forced out along the road right about here. And it's surprising to us that they didn't catch him on foot right here on those cameras.
Camera's there.
You'd have thought.
You can see how visible.
You'd have thought he'd have been visible walking along the road here. And again, if he stayed along the road, he'd have had to pass these houses. Dylan and I walked this earlier from the cemetery to the where the CPS parking lot was, and we only had four vehicles pass us in that walk. From the cemetery to the CPS building was about an 18-minute walk if you were not trying to hide and walk along a tree line. I would expect from the cemetery to this place right here, which is where he would have been parked, I would think that it would have taken him at least half an hour if he was kind of ducking in and out of the trees, maybe even a little more. And you could probably add 15 to 20 minutes to that coming up from the river, maybe 15 minutes. But that's still a fair amount of time. I'm guessing that from the time whoever murdered those girls left the bodies where they were found to when they got back here to the vehicle, I'll bet it was close to an hour. That's just my